Hi, I'm Steve Arch and I'm chair of the Department of English at Michigan State University. And I've been asked to talk a little bit about Jonathan Safran Foer's novel, Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, particularly in response to several topics that we think readers might be troubled by in thinking about the novel. The first one is about Oscar's unique personality. How does Oscar's unique character contribute to the story that Foer gives us? Some of the early reviews of this novel talked about the sort of problem, in quotation marks, of Oscar's personality, that Oscar seems very smart for a 9-year-old boy, that he knows things that most 9-year-old boys don't know. He's precocious in ways that some readers found overly sentimental. I would urge readers of this novel to think about the way in which Oscar is a child in response to 9/11, a child who's thinking about the response to the 9/11 disaster, and that Foer does that on purpose. There are many novels written in the last 10 years that are trying to think about 9/11 and our response to 9/11. Some of them quite famous, some of them very successful, others less so. Foer, I think, takes a narrator who is a child, in part because if my response is typical of many people's responses to 9/11, we all felt a little bit childlike on that day that it happened. We all felt overwhelmed by the horror of what we saw, by the trauma of the experience, by the sense in which we were reduced to a spectator who couldn't quite understand the things that were going on around us. In that sense, I would urge readers to think about Oscar as less a realistic character than as a set of ideas, as a respondent to a cultural trauma which is deep, which is lasting, and which in some sense is simply hard to comprehend, to get our heads around. Oscar is also, in a literary tradition, a childlike respondent to a world that is confusing, that is reminiscent of, say, Huck Finn in Mark Twain's novel Huck Finn, reminiscent of a character named Oscar in Günter Grass's famous novel The Tin Drum, who is an adult, but who is determined earlier in his life never to grow up in response to the trauma around him. And also, maybe a character that many readers would know better, Holden Caulfield, in J.D. Salinger's novel The Catcher in the Rye, who is also a character who, in some sense, refuses to grow up, who responds to the world around him by thinking about ways in which it's simply too overwhelming to be an adult. And in that sense, what Foer wants us to do as readers is to read Oscar's character less as realistic than as a character who is like other literary characters, and as a character who urges us to think about the world in ways that he's thinking about it. A big place that's difficult to comprehend, where there are mysteries everywhere, and where finally what we need is a way to find our way back to simple, loving relationships, as Oscar does at the end of the novel.